Hey everyone, welcome back to the Devlog. In this update, I've been working on creating a player character for the game, and over the past few months, I've been learning how to sculpt, rig, and clothe a full character from scratch, as well as getting it running inside Unreal. It's been a huge learning experience, and it's had quite a few challenges, but it's also been pretty rewarding. Before I dive into that, I figure I owe you all an explanation on why this video is showing up so late. So, I actually started working on the updates right after the last update, but halfway through the month, my PC started running into some serious issues. All three of my monitors would randomly go black, and the only fix was a full hard shutdown. At first, I thought my GPU had failed, which would have been a pretty big issue, as I would have had to go through the RMA process, and my PC would be out of commission for at least a few weeks. But after nearly a month of trial and error, I finally figured out what the culprit was, and it was the power supply. So, since replacing the power supply, which was just a few days ago, things have been running smoothly again. That said, the issue made it really hard to record, and I lost a lot of footage to crashes, and progress in general moved a lot slower than I had expected. Still, I managed to get a lot done, so let's jump right into it. To start off, I jumped into sculpting. Since this was my first time creating a full character, I began by blocking out the form using simple primitives such as spheres, cylinders, and other basic shapes, just to get the proportions right. From there, I gradually refined each section, increasing the resolution step by step so that I could sculpt in more detail. Once all of the individual parts were shaped, I merged everything together into one mesh and spent a bit of time smoothing out seams and blending areas that didn't quite connect cleanly. It was a slow process, but it gave me a solid foundation to work from. Once I had a complete sculpt, the next step was retopology. Now, even though Unreal can handle high poly meshes, I didn't want to rely on something that dense, especially when it comes to the character deformations or when it came to baking textures later on. So, I looked into different retopology options and eventually landed on a Blender add-on called retopology. It ended up being a great decision, and the tools are pretty intuitive, and it made the whole process feel way less painful. I was able to create clean, game-ready geometry, and I didn't spend hours wrestling with edge loops. With the body in a good place, I started working on the hair, and this part turned out to be trickier than I expected. I tried creating stylized strands with curves using a 2D plane mesh to create additional topology. Visually, it looked fine, but the downside was the poly count. It ended up being heavier than the entire body mesh, which isn't really sustainable. So, I'm planning on revisiting this process later on to figure out a better method, probably by simplifying the hair into a larger mesh shape and then relying on more textures to sell the detail. I may also try out Unreal's groom system down the line to see if that works better for the style that I'm going for. With modeling mostly done, it was time to move on to rigging, and that's where things really started to get frustrating. I started by trying to rig directly in Unreal Engine, and to be fair, the tools that it has to create the bones are pretty good. But when it came to weight painting, I just hit a wall. I couldn't find any way to mirror the weights, and manually painting both sides of the mesh would be a lot more work, as I would need to manually make sure everything was evenly weighted on both sides. So, I tried bringing the Unreal armature into Blender, and that came with a whole new set of problems. The import didn't behave properly, and even after several hours of debugging, I couldn't get it to work. So next, I turned to Rigify, Blender's built-in rigging tool. And setting it up was pretty smooth, and everything worked well inside of Blender, but when I tried exporting to Unreal, things just fell apart again. Even when exporting just the deformed bones, I still wasn't able to get a good import. So at this point, I decided to stop fighting it and just invest in another plugin, and this one's called Auto Rig Pro. And honestly, I kind of wish I'd done it a bit sooner. It's a paid plugin, but it handles both the body and the facial rigging, and more importantly, it exports cleanly into Unreal. So if you're watching this and you're also working on humanoid characters and need a reliable pipeline, I can definitely say that using this plugin is definitely worth it. Now, I was a bit disappointed that I wasn't able to do this myself, but I do still plan to rig non-human characters by hand, but for this kind of setup, it ended up just saving me days of work. And even though I didn't end up getting that manual export, I still learned a ton about how the rigging system works and what not to do for the next time. So once the rig was finally working, I moved on to clothing, and honestly this felt like a bit of a reward after all the rigging headaches. It also helped to finally cover up the mannequin. Spending hours a day staring at a blank base mesh gets a little weird after a while, and I couldn't record much of it anyway since I didn't want YouTube to flag anything, even though the model wasn't anatomically detailed. I had originally read that clothing should come after rigging, and since you'll be transferring weights from the body, it does make sense. But now that I've gone through the process, I would definitely suggest for anyone who's learning this themselves that you can actually model the clothing onto the character a lot earlier. Just make sure you keep it separate as a separate mesh. That's especially helpful if you want to make a modular outfit or skin swap the character later on. So to actually make the clothes, there's a couple different methods that you could choose. I ended up going the way of a cloth sim, and in order to do this, I used a plugin called Simply Cloth Pro. And so what this does is it lets you model a couple different 2D meshes or 2D planes into various clothing patterns. And then from there, you're able to simulate them being sewn together using Blender's Cloth Sim. And so once the sim finishes, you get a pretty nicely shaped outfit that's pretty close to where it needs to be. And then after that, I went in and manually connected the pieces since they don't actually join together perfectly, and then applied a solidify modifier. Once this was done, I added some extra detail with sculpting, and then that was pretty much it. It did take some time to figure out the workflow, but once I got it down, it felt pretty intuitive. After shaping the clothes, I needed to retopologize them as well. At first, I did try using retopoflow again, but I found out that it doesn't really work super well with thick meshes, considering that they actually have inside faces. So I ended up switching to, as you probably guessed it, another plugin. And this plugin is called Quad Remesher. So what this plugin is that it actually does automatic remeshing, and from what I hear, it's actually pretty similar to ZBrush. And I gotta say, it did work great. Although I did realize afterward that I probably should have run it before solidifying the mesh. Doing so after kind of led to some strange topology, but to be fair, that was pretty much entirely my fault. Once the clothing was retopologized, I transferred the weights from the body using AutoRig Pro Skeleton and Blender's weight transfer functionality. From there, I brought both the body and the clothing into Substance Painter, baked the high resolution details, and did some quick basic texturing just to get everything into a usable state for Unreal. Finally, I brought the character into Unreal as a skeletal mesh and hooked everything up in Blueprint. And it worked! The character is in-game, running around, and the deformations look solid. There's still a lot more polish that's needed, but I'm really happy with how far things have come. That said, there's still work to do. The textures need another pass, and there are a few places where the body clips through the clothing due to mismatched deformation. I've got some ideas on how to fix that, possibly making the body modular underneath. Also, the character's wide-eyed stare is a little creepy, so I need to add some blinking animation soon. In addition to that, I've also hired a concept artist to help bring the character into better focus. I wanted to get a reference that's actually made for the game, not just pulled from various sources on Google. And this should give me something concrete to model from and help keep things consistent visually as I refine the design. But overall, learning this full pipeline from sculpting to Unreal has been a huge step forward. Now that I know the workflow, I could do it again and much faster. Which brings me to my plan for next month. I'm actually going to redo the character. There's a few areas that I'd like to improve, and now that I have the process down, I want to make a more polished version. One that's a bit closer to the final look for the game. Plus, now that my PC is stable, I can actually record the process properly this time, and hopefully have a better video for next month. After that, I'll be shifting gears. Once a new version of the characters finish, I'll spend the following month working on the game's development plan, outlining gameplay, systems, and core mechanics, as well as figuring out what the overall experience should be like. It won't be perfect, but it'll give me, and hopefully you, a much clearer idea of where this project is heading. But before I wrap up, I also wanted to share a quick life update. So I recently accepted a job for essentially the next year. The goal is to extend my runway and make sure I can keep building the game long term. That means development will be part-time for a while, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll still be working on the game, still posting devlogs, and I fully intend to return to full-time development once this job is wrapped up. This move just gives me a little bit more time and stability to finish the game the right way, which for me I think is just without rushing. So that's it for this one. A bit longer than usual, and definitely later than I had planned, but hopefully it gives you a better sense of what I've been working on. As always, if you have any good ideas for me, workflow tips, or just want to say hey, feel free to leave a comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.